Welcome to Totem Talks. I'm delighted today to have invited Peter Clark to join us. Peter is the Head of Operational Change at the national law firm DWF, who've gone through significant growth in the last couple of years, which has included 4 mergers. I've invited Peter today because we have seen an increase in focus by law firms on recruiting people to help them with their process improvement, their project management techniques, and their general sort of pursuit of more efficiency. And Peter's background has lent itself to that over many years. So Peter, it'd be really great if you could initially just give a little bit of a background on your background on your career to date.
Okay. Going back about 20 years, I've been involved in outsourcing and operational back office consulting. And what that's done is given me a sort of set of tools and experiences to look at a whole range of things that are relevant to what the work I've been doing at DWF. So if you think about an outsourcing contract, what the outsourcer is trying to do is deliver better quality service, to deliver increasing quantities of service, but do it in a profitable way. Yeah. So it's trying to widen that gap between, if you like, service levels and quality and the profitability for the outsourcing firm. And going to DWF, it's very similar in style to an outsourcing type contract, because DWF is essentially providing business-to-business services. Yeah. So what we're trying to do again in DWF is increase the quality of service to our clients, yep, whilst at the same time becoming more profitable. Yeah. Now that whole range of outsourcing skills and experiences includes things like putting together business cases, putting together P&L statements, yep, understanding operational design, understanding, yep, processes, understanding how to utilise technology, yep, and the change management that goes with taking a bunch of people from one organisation into another. So that's the background that attracted yeah, DWF to someone with that sort of skill and experience in the first place. And
I'm intrigued to hear your sort of thoughts on when you got there. I mean, there's a general consensus out there that I hear time and time again that law firms are inefficient, they're stuck in the dark ages, blah, blah, blah. I mean, how did you find it?
Well, it was very different. Having worked in consulting partnerships before, I thought that that would equip me pretty well in working in a sort of partnership, yeah, environment. But it is certainly different in a law firm, and I think one of there's 2 main differences, I think. One is that because they practice in specific areas of work, so they're focusing very much on the profitability, the client service, the client growth, the development, yeah, the market in their own area. And the second point is that there's a completely different language between the world that I'm in terms of yeah, process, organisation, design, Six Sigma, yeah, and Lean, yeah, and there's a whole different lexicon that they use, yeah, that it took me a while to get to learn as well.
Yeah. And what were your initial findings when you got there?
Well, I was originally taken in to do a specific project in one practice area. Yeah. And that was in an area where it's quite high volume processing. Over the previous 18 months, the number of instructions they received during that period had grown from about 150 instructions a month over 18 months to 300 instructions a month. Yeah. So they were suffering from, I think, what is probably typical in a lot of law firms, where to meet the increase in demand, the only tool that they had at their disposal was to increase the resources, yep, to do it. So there was, you'd expect sort of a parallel growth. However, the constraints of that were the obvious one of floor space. They didn't have any, yeah, anywhere to put everyone that they needed to recruit. The second was because they're quite big in the markets that they're in anyway, it was difficult to recruit the right sort of people as well. Yeah. So really what we had to focus on was how we could meet that increased demand with the same number of people, yeah, who were doing that. Yeah. So that was where that sort of first wave of detail around looking at process and technology and structures and getting the right sort of operational data out, yeah, took a while to really get to grips with the actual situation that they were working in at the time.
Okay. Since you got there, has your role expanded at all?
Yes, the original project, we put the proposal forward for a whole change programme, which was going to be at least 12 months, and we're now 12 months into that, and progressing quite well in terms of what we're doing in that specific area. But at the same time, what I did was talk to the practice around a number of other observations that I'd made around just looking at the law firm. What I'd presented to them was essentially a maturity model, and maturity models have been around quite a lot in the outsourcing world, having grown out of IT software development.
Yeah.
But now they've been developed, and so a lot of business back office processes have maturity models.
Okay.
And a maturity model looks at where a company stands in terms of where it is in terms of its definition of strategy, its organisation, its governance, its processes, its use of technology, compliance, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so, given the rapid change that had gone on in DWF over the previous 5 years, you know, in which it's doubled in size, they'd almost outgrown themselves. So presenting it as a maturity model enabled me to sort of point to specific areas where there are opportunity to make further improvements. Yeah. So in putting that together, they asked me to form a team of business process improvement managers, as we've called them. We've created a team called Operational Change. Mm-hmm. And so what we now have is a sort of portfolio of strategic projects that are both in the legal areas, the legal practice areas, and in the back office areas. So that's the sort of team we've had in place since last summer. So there's 5 of us in that team now.
So Peter, once you'd delivered on that initial project that you'd been brought into, as you said, your roles expanded and rolled out more broadly. How did the other parts of the partnership react to that introduction of you to them?
Well, what we needed to do was open the discussion so that we could identify other areas where we could actually do business process improvement work. So we had to talk to the partners in a way that would make sense to them, rather than just going in and talking about sort of Six Sigma and Lean and project management. So rather than talking to the partners just about the projects we were going to undertake, we decided that we would present to them a series of themes about the work that we were trying to do. So the themes, the 5 themes we talked about were: 1, maturity, and so this was the point around them having outgrown themselves, and there was quite a lot of catching up to do in the way that they utilised process and technology and organisation design and so forth. The second was obviously about client service. So obviously, whilst there's a lot of change going on, they still want to maintain a level of service, a high level of service to their clients. So we talked about how the business process improvement work would be able to support them in increasing quality, meeting SLAs, and of key importance was being able to provide the clients with some better view of the value they would get from using DWF. So in one instance, for example, we were able to demonstrate that for every £1 that the client spends with DWF, they get £5 of value back in that particular practice area. So that was the second one. The third area was profitability. Obviously, again, very key to the partners to understand the profitability. So this is where we started to use a number of P words like productivity and process and procedure, and talk about how we would use those to achieve the next part of the theme, which was standardisation. So it's a national law firm. It's got a number of offices in different locations, and with the mergers over the last 15 months or so, even more offices. So what we were trying to do was create a more standard platform that would enable us to make mergers and future mergers more digestible in the sense that we could overlay the mergers on top of more standardised work activity. The next part of the next theme that we wanted to cover with them was around predictability. So this can help with things like business planning, it can help things pricing, it can help with compliance, and that was part of getting the processes properly defined, increasing the predictability and consistency of training, and the way that work is done in a consistent way in different locations. So that's also been a key part of what we've done is to be able to, in the areas where we've worked so far, is to be able to look at the work across all the locations, so that we've been able to take advantages of differences in capacity to meet the demand.
What have been the main challenges that you faced in making your role a success at DWF?
One of the key challenges has been data, and having talked earlier about doing a lot of work around putting together business cases and analysing processes and using sort of Six Sigma techniques to do that sort of analysis. You need rich data to be able to do it. So again, a feature of the growth of DWF has been that with disparate systems, it was quite difficult to get the right sort of data. So a large part of what was happening in the early days of the project and in the other projects we've taken on since have been getting the right sort of data to do the right sort of analysis. But when we have got it, it's enabled us to really focus in on what we've been doing. We've been working with another practice area, for example, and we were able to see which steps in that legal process were the ones that were causing the profitability issues. So we've restructured the team and have different fee earners working on certain types of cases in response to the data analysis we're able to do. So that's sort of been a key area. Another one is around terminology and the lexicon, and really just marrying up that sort of process world with the legal world. And getting people to understand what we're trying to do.
And has that been you educating them or vice versa?
Very much both. It's very much a two-way thing.
I'm very familiar with the fact that lawyers hate jargon. No, so you managed to get over that, have you?
Oh, very much. I've just, as an example, one of the first meetings I sat in was looking at motor fraud. And they were talking about missed cases, and I thought missed cases were cases that they had not won. And then I found out afterwards that missed cases, missed is an acronym for minor injury soft tissue, which you and I would know as whiplash. That's just an example of where where it was a two-way thing. Another one is if you like, the project management discipline. There are a lot of projects, a lot of initiatives going on at any one time. And I think that having come from outsourcing and large consulting organisations where project management is the bread and butter, that whole point around conceiving projects, getting projects approved, making sure that you've got the right split of resources between people who are running day-to-day business and people who are focused on projects and actually reporting projects according to a sort of proper life cycle of project events. That's been another part of sort of educating and implementing that. And linked very much to that has been the sort of change management aspects and trying to sort of make sure that the right change management levers are pulled at the right time in the scope of the project.
Just moving on to a slightly different subject, but and picking up on your experience within the outsourcing world, I'd be really interested to get your views on where you see the whole outsourcing of business services going in the legal sector.
I think it's an interesting question, and having been in the, for 15 months now involved with the law firm, I think that there are some areas where you could outsource in the same way that other firms do. So you'd look at IT outsourcing, which was obviously one of the first areas 20 or 30 years ago where people were outsourcing. So you could look at IT. I think some of the other sort of back office services like HR, the HR outsourcing market has developed and matured over the last 10 years. So there's opportunities there. And maybe it's on a more tactical basis than on a strategic basis. One of the areas where I know there's a market for outsourcing is in the outsourcing of secretarial services and things like that. And I think what I see from relatively limited experience in the legal market at the moment is that the work that secretaries do, certain types of secretarial work, is so closely associated with the fee earner that it would be difficult to outsource the whole of the sort of secretarial function. But maybe parts of it, like document production and archiving and things like that, you would. So I think it may well be a sort of tactical outsourcing market at the moment rather than a strategic outsourcing market.
And just taking that a stage further, looking at the offshoring aspect, anecdotally we meet people who work in various roles in the legal market, and there seems to be a sense that offshoring isn't as popular as it might have appeared when it was a concept. And do you have a view on that?
Well, I think that offshoring is appropriate. Having been involved in quite a lot of offshoring, there's certain types of processes that I think work well with offshoring, where you can take advantage of obviously the cost arbitrage that you get from that. But one of the issues that we've seen in more recent years is that labour arbitrage, if you like, is disappearing because it's getting more expensive in India. Nothing to do with staff, but when I first started moving work to India 10 years ago, it used to cost £90 to stay in the hotel. It's £250 in that same hotel now. So the cost of managing offshoring is a lot more, never mind the labour arbitrage. But there's also, what is interesting is some of the way that technology is changing now, especially in process-related technology, is that for certain types of processes, it doesn't necessarily need to be offshored or outsourced to a low-cost provider. You can actually do it through sort of technology, and there are firms that are out there now sort of growing up which are sort of looking at sort of what they call fourth-generation outsourcing, which is a lot more around automation than offshoring. There are also other firms out there, also other companies, not necessarily in the legal profession, who are outsourcing with labour arbitrage within the UK. There are people who are moving work to to South Wales, where there are grants available. They haven't got the management overhead of having to travel abroad to manage a supplier who's a long distance away. So there are, the market is quite different to how it was 10 years ago in terms of alternative sourcing strategies for different types of processes.
Peter, thank you very much for coming in today. I really find this whole area utterly fascinating. I mean, we're getting calls, week on week about this whole area of process improvement, lean, project management, Prince2, all of that, and it's intriguing to hear your experience both outside the sector and your 18 months or so with DWF. So I really appreciate you coming today. So thank you. That concludes our Totem talks around the whole area of project management, process, lean, all these words that 5 years ago didn't exist in the legal sector, but they're here to stay.